like 5 minutes. Or is it still supposed to be 50 minutes?
It's still supposed to be 50.
Yeah, 50. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Okay, I believe you are live now.
it does say live and recording, so boy, are we
Okay.
scared. Hi there. If you've just joined us, this is The Price of Magic. And I'm MH Bonham, the moderator of this. Welcome to MileHiCon. We'll first start with the introductions because I think we have a bunch of very, very talented people here. So we'll start with Carol Berg first, and then we'll go on to Ian, then Connie, and lastly to Lynn. Oh, well, not lastly to Lynn, and then lastly to me. How about that? So go ahead, Carol.
Oh, well, see, that doesn't give me any time to hear what everybody else says. So, but my name is Carol Berg. I write fantasy novels. My 18th novel comes out in February from Tor. It's called A Summoning of Demons. My most recent book is a Conjuring of A Conjuring of Assassins. I forget everything this year. I hope everybody's well. So far, so good. But anyway, so I love inventing magic systems. I've done 5, 6 different ones for my 6 different series and standalone. And I think the price there has to be a price. Can be a lot of different things, which is what we're going to talk about.
Questions. Ian.
Good morning. My name is Ian Tregellis. I'm a novelist from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm the author of 7 novels, 2 trilogies, both that are sort of integrally wrapped up in sort of the various ideas about what magic does to people and the price it wreaks not only on people, but on sort of the people around them and their society. In my day job, I'm a scientist at Los Alamos, but I never write science fiction. I always put magic in my stories for some weird, deep-seated psychological reason that is probably undiagnosable. So, and thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back at MileHiCon.
Connie.
Hi, I'm Connie Willis. I've been writing science fiction my whole life. My most recent novel is The Road to Roswell, which I just finished. And I have a new, the most recent thing I have is a short story called Take a Look at the 5 and 10, which is a Christmas short story, and it'll be in Asimov's December issue this year. So it should be out any second now, so, which is nice. And we're surviving the pandemic, and I've had several surgeries during the pandemic, but there's nothing else to do, so we're good.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you've survived it so far. Great.
Yes, exactly.
And Lynn.
Hi, my name is Lynn Worthen, and under my name, I work as a fiction editor, and I've built multiple multi-author anthologies, the most recent of which is Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, which coincidentally and completely unplanned came out just at the very beginning of the lockdown in early April. Under my Leigh Saunders pen name, I also write science fiction and fantasy. I've got a couple of novels, a bunch of short stories, and I'm currently, my most recent is Partners in Crime, which is part of the Misha Kiff Chronicles. It's a science fiction heist series that I describe as leverage in outer space. So I like to play around with it and have fun that way. I also enjoy writing fantasy, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you all.
Awesome. And I'm MH Bonham. I'm the author of more than 50 books by now. My current series is called the Iron Spell Chronicles. It is a urban fantasy with an unlikely hero, and I too write a lot of books with magic, even though my background has been primarily computer science. in the past. So go figure. So let's go ahead with the first question that I have, and I'll call on each of you. That way we're not talking over each other. Is there a price for doing magic, or is it just an endless supply of power, a la Harry Potter, for example? I'm going to start with Carol. I know I'm a troublemaker because you're next to me on the screen, so you're the one who's gonna get it first. Go ahead and answer the question, then we'll go on to Ian, and then Connie, and then Lynn, and I'll make up my own bizarre comments at the end, and then we'll go on.
Okay, well, I do believe there needs to be a price to magic. There's a price to anything we do, especially, I mean, if we are athletes or if we're artists or whatever, there's always a price to what we do. It takes, in order to put ourselves, our energies into one thing that we want to be really good at, we have to subtract from. Ask any spouse of a writer. They will tell you there is a price for our art. And so, yes, I believe in that. I believe it can come in a lot of different forms, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's society exacting a price for what you do, even if it's allowed, whether it's familial. I think there's a lot of different kinds price that a magic system can make. And I think that's probably one of the earliest things you have to decide when you're going to write magic into your book. And you're always looking for something. I know I am always looking for something a little different from something I've done before. And so I think it's a really important piece of making it feel real, which is what we want to do. We want to make people be able to get into our stories and believe. And I think that's part of believability.
Ian.
I completely agree with Carol. Yeah, magic has to have a price. I was a long time ago, I heard Walter John Williams, who's part of my local writing community. He's very good at throwing out these little bon mots of writing wisdom that often sort of rock me on my heels. And one day he said, well, you know, magic has to be very hard because otherwise everyone can do it. And then the consensual basis of reality breaks down. And, you know, of course, this sort of self-evident when he said it, but it sort of fireworks went off in my brain. And I ended up, one of my novels, my standalone novel, Something More Than Night, was totally built from that one statement from Walter. And then, as I said, my trilogies, I'm always sort of playing with this idea of the price of magic. I don't know what it says about me, but I always tend to think that magic comes with a high price in moral compromise. And it changes the practitioners in ways that aren't always immediately evident, but ways that have almost these generational costs in terms of what they do to the people and sort of their souls, if you will, and the soul of the society where, you know, where magic, if magic is a pillar of your society, there's probably some rot somewhere, right? Because magic is a subversion of the laws of nature, which is probably a bad thing. So yeah, magic absolutely needs to have a cost.
Connie.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's an exception to that rule, that somebody has come up with a way to do magic without any cost to anybody, because there's an exception to every writing rule. But I think that you want a price, not just because of believability, but because of how it interests your reader. Your reader is not going to be interested in your story if just anything can happen any old time. Harry Potter, I'm looking at you. And I don't, you know, where it just can come out of the blue. Gardner Dozois used to tell this wonderful story of a story he'd found in the slush pile, where this guy is running from this horrible monster across Brooklyn Bridge, and the monster is catching up with him. and he drops to the side thinking maybe the monster will run right by him, but he doesn't. And he's hanging on by his fingernails. And then the monster comes over and immediately begins prying his fingers loose one at a time from the Brooklyn Bridge. And he's just about to fall. Oh, I forgot to tell you, he could fly anytime he wanted.
Oh.
And that's just your classic, there may be a price, but you didn't bother to inform your readers of what that price was up front. And if we don't know what the magic is capable of, or what anything is capable of, we are just not interested in the story. We can't think, oh my gosh, they're gonna die, if we're halfway thinking, or not, because maybe they'll come up with something, because I don't know how this whole system works. So I think, yeah, terribly important to have prices in everything you do in writing. I mean, that's just really another name for consequences, but you've got to have those in every kind of writing. So
Thank you, Connie. Lynn.
Well, to start off, I think Carol stole my notes, but I absolutely agree and I was thinking about that this morning, that it's just like, whether you're a performer or an athlete or a technical person, you had to study, you had to learn, you had to develop whether they were innate skills or skills you just simply decided that you wanted to make your own. But I was also thinking that in some of our fantasy worlds, the magic is more of a resource. Like, we have water in the ocean, and there are many things we can do with it. But once again, there is a price. Do we have to desalinate that water in order to drink it? Do we get this reserve of magic that we have to figure out how to use? We can go to the grocery store and buy all sorts of ingredients, but you have to have some vague level of skill in order to cook a pot of ramen or make a souffle. The same with the magical components and resources that you might use for spell work, or, in whatever kind of magical situation that you're creating in the story. And so once again, whether it's developing skill or paying a price in terms of, I'm going to learn to run a marathon so that I don't drop dead at the end of it because of heart failure. You've had to, so sometimes it's a skill level, sometimes it's an exhaustion level, or a physical drain, or an emotional drain. There's always something. It's a give and take, because I think some level of balance has to occur for it to be believable, and for your world not to just go completely sideways.
Great, thank you, Lynn. My own answer is very similar to all of our panelists. Basically, I feel that there has to be some sort of limit to magic, and some sort of price, because otherwise, if you could just conjure up anything you want, or make things occur just randomly to help you, then the story becomes uninteresting, as Carol Berg pointed out. So let's go on to my next question. What sort of costs have you seen in books, including your own, if you, when you write books with magic in them, what sort of cost could there be for using magic? And we'll start with Carol, because, as I said, she's she's right next to me, so I better start with her. Yes.
Well, golly. Oh, okay. At least that's what I'm prepared for. Well, I've tried a lot of different things. I've seen magic. If you've ever read anything by Courtney Schaefer, The White Flower Crossing, magic is something, it's a resource, and it's made into charms, and it's how much you can afford to buy in order to use to protect yourself, to keep your bones from breaking, whatever. And that kind of thing. I've seen where exhaustion, and the trouble is, if using magic is physically exhausting, where you expend a great deal, and you then have to recover, what that does is it leaves you vulnerable. And I think vulnerability is a important price, because then you have to judge, do I do this, do I not? And you have this constant tension of whether I should act now or save it for later. I know it's gonna, cost me something. I also I've done my most recent books, the Chimera books, my Cate Glass books. She's my doppelganger, and she and there the price is the individual talent. Well, there's a big price in that magic is illegal, and if you're caught doing it, you can. This is the societal kind of thing. Is that it violates some of the mythology of the world, and therefore you die if you get caught doing it. But when you have people who do dare, they can have failures. One of my characters, she can create, she can impersonate anyone she wants. She can actually become a very believable person. But the problem is she can't get herself out, that she's stuck there. If she doesn't have one of her partners there to touch her skin and say her true name, then she could be lost in this persona forever. She can do lots of wonderful things by being able to impersonate a countess or impersonate, a scuba diver or whatever. Well, except it's not contemporary, but she can. It's very powerful, and she can create these, be a spy in place, and she can sort of retain some consciousness of her own to imbue this character with what she needs to do, but she can be lost. So there could be terrible personal consequences. That this could be forever. And so I think that there's everything from using magic can disorder nature itself. I've done that. And so there's there's a lot of different ways. I'll let somebody else do.
Ian.
Well, I think Connie really got to the heart of it, how the price of magic is another name for consequences, which all stories need. That's a really good distillation. And that immediately brought to mind for me, while it's not someone sort of like practicing magic in the way we might think, that immediately brought to mind for me Ursula Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven, where there's sort of magical consequences going on, where someone is trying to take advantage of something that sort of has a magical power, right? This man who dreams, and his dreams become real. There, I think, now it's been like 30 years since I've read it, so my memory for details is not great. But the way I remember the story is that this man's therapist, every time he tries to shape this man's dreams to solve some problem or affect some change in the world, it's a real monkey paw. Yeah, it did what you wanted, but not in the way you wanted it to, or not in the way you imagined. In fact, I think, do I remember correctly that there's actually a pandemic in that book? I don't know, does anyone? Yeah, it's been so long since I remembered it. There is an alien invasion at one point, which is again, well, that got the effect you wanted, but not the way you wanted it.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of the law of unintended consequences.
Yes.
So I think when I think of that and combine it with magic, the Lathe of Heaven is probably the shining example in my mind.
Connie.
Okay, I'm going to give a real life example. Okay. In World War II, at the beginning of World War II, the British were given a magical thing, a magical object, and it was Ultra. And it was the information ability to decode the Germans' codes. The Germans were unaware of it, and everything depended on the Germans not finding out that we were able to decode their messages. And if they found out, we not only lost the power of the magical object, but we also could never use it again, where we might need it, really need it later on, where we only kind of need it now. And so huge, huge consequences accompanied every single attempt to use it or not use it, and every single decision that was made. And Ian has talked before about moral compromise. And one of the things that happened with Ultra was that they found out that Hitler was, we were trying to make Hitler think that we were going to base an attack from Malta. We weren't actually going to do that. But we needed to convince them of that. And so we set up everything, and they used Ultra because they could have situations where they would find out about a convoy from Ultra, but then they could send a reconnaissance plane, to supposedly see the convoy. And then that would be how we knew that it was there, not Ultra. And so, but there was a situation in Malta where we didn't have that option, and there was no way, and we still had to do it. We had to do the thing that the magical object had told us, the glass, what is it, the magical ball that we could look into had told us that we were going to do it. So instead they came up with a hugely complicated plot in which they said that there was a spy loose in Malta, and the spy was the one delivering all this information to us. They were very careful. They weren't trying to do any damage. They did not ever name that spy because of course he didn't exist. But the Germans somehow managed to come up with the name for that spy, and they executed him. And the British were responsible for that because this magical object just made it, what they were doing was accompanied by 1, unintended consequences, and 2, by moral compromise, because you just can't use it or not use it. Everything you do, if you don't use it, then you're accused of letting Coventry burn to the ground. If you do use it, then you don't have it to save D-Day. So it's a classic example. I mean, we don't usually think of that as a magical object, but it really was. It was a crystal ball. And the way it plays out is a way that I have seen magical systems play out in a lot of fiction, because of course, that's the way it really works.
Great, thank you, Connie. Lynn.
Well, I was thinking of, I'm here, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was thinking of the story of the picture of Dorian Gray and how the consequences all were applied to the painting, which he had to work very, very hard to keep not only preserved, but hidden. Because when, and when that all finally unraveled for him at the end, the consequences then unraveled him. But, sometimes the consequences aren't readily apparent. But the cost is very much there, and it's just a matter of when does that bill become due, as everyone has suggested in the various examples. And there is a lawnmower outside, so if you hear a background noise, hopefully they will finish this side of the house very quickly. Anyway, but yeah, another magical consequence. It's quieter than guts in the yard, so. But yeah, that's what I was thinking, is the consequences aren't always apparent right away. Sometimes they are, as in the case where, if someone suffers from exhaustion when they perform a spell, do they trust the people that they're with to carry their body on until they recover or to protect them? In the Dorian Gray case, how long can he keep his secret before it's ultimately revealed? So a lot of different types of situations will occur. And I think that's part of the fun of creating these kinds of worlds and systems, is figuring out which way are you going to play with which way are you going to roll the dice.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. What I noticed, at least with my own work, is that I try to limit the amount of magic that some users have, simply because they just don't have the training or the experience or anything like that. And then when they do get it, then it's a matter of the amount of effort. The bigger the spell, obviously, the more energy it takes from you and how tired you are. The other side of the coin, and I've seen this in a few books, has been there's this one wizard who has a disease that every time he uses magic, it makes him even more ill. It makes him sicker. So he doesn't want to use magic unless it's his only option, and it could kill him. So that's why he stays away from it. Always I've seen a lot of those type of clever ideas show up with how people have limited magic. And we've already talked about why do you think it's important to limit magic, not have the Harry Potter. Carol and I touched on it, but I'd like to go more in depth. I mean, I've talked to some people and they say, well, if you have magic, you can do anything. So I've seen the limits of certain, I've seen people limit it. Do you limit it when you create your magic, when you create a magic system? Do you limit it in a certain way of the way it's being cast, or the way, or the price, or what is going on with that? I'll change it up and start with Lynn. Oh my, Lynn?
Yep. Well, sorry about the lawnmower again.
That's okay. Don't
I was
worry about it.
thinking, it's our own magic. I was thinking a little bit about another book that I am working on that uses a kind of natural elemental magic, where the people who have the gifts of working with the magic, they can only work within the element that they are attuned to. So the main character in one of my books can work with stone and, by extension, sand, because, as she says, sand is nothing but ground up stone over a long time. But and she has to be in contact with it in order to shape it and do things with the stone. But she has no power over the wind or the trees or the water. She can only work within her element. Other people have control over nature or control over the weather. And so the different affinities that the different people who have magical abilities in this series, in this world, it's limited by the element that they have that affinity with. And it makes for some interesting, I can do this, but I can't do that kinds of situations. And if sometimes I put a character in a situation where, I'm sorry, I can make you a castle out of stone and have it just grow up out of the desert, but I can't provide any food or water. So, it requires teamwork and balance. And again, looking at all of these different pieces and how they work together and what are the constraints.
Okay, that's awesome. Connie.
Okay, well, I was thinking about an example for me of the bad things that happen when you have unlimited magic and no limits on anybody. I can't think of the title of the movie, but it was the Superman reboot, the first Superman reboot, and in it they have Superman goes up against a villain. And I don't even remember the villain. And they are having a battle to the death, only it's not a battle to the death because both of them are immortal and neither one can be hurt. So they managed to destroy most of New York City in the process, which is really annoying to me. But they don't, I was so bored during this fight. I nearly fell asleep because there was nothing at stake. There was, I kept hoping that someone would appear and pull out some kryptonite maybe to make it interesting, but nothing. There was just these two evenly matched people who couldn't die, couldn't lose, couldn't be hurt, and nothing was going to happen. So I think that when you set up your thing, you're going to have to limit it in some ways. And you're going to have to, but the problem I think that a lot of people get into is they will limit it the way they want to limit it. They get very fixated on the story they want to tell. So they're going to have, I wrote a novel about telepathy. So they're going to have telepathy, but they're not going to have any of the annoying or difficult parts of telepathy. They're just going to have the character will be able to hear whoever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want,
Right.
with no limits, which doesn't make any sense. But they don't have to listen to other people. And when they want to listen to a specific person, they can hear that person, and they don't have to put up with the fact that you would, in fact, if you were telepathic and were picking up all these messages, it would just be this huge cacophony and this awful din, and you would fall completely apart because you couldn't sort it out. So I think you have to make sure that when you're structuring your system, that it works the way it really would work. And I know that sounds ridiculous since you're making up stuff, but it's got to follow laws of logic, and it's got to follow laws of what are people, if there's a past history, like with telepathy, everybody thinks they know how telepathy works anyway. And so you have to build from that. Or if you're going to veer away from that, you have to lay out why you're veering away from it, so that you've got the rules laid out, and they're laid out in advance. And I think some people say, well, but if you lay them out in advance, then there's nothing interesting going on. One of the things that I like to do in a story is to have a system that I know how it works as the author, but my characters only gradually figure out how it works. And in the telepathy novel, my heroine only gradually gets the ability to hear other people. And it's first it's one person, and then it's another person, and then it's everybody. And then she finally figures out how to handle this situation. But I did not have her with a full understanding at the beginning. And I do think that is helpful. I think, in Lord of the Rings, they do that. Frodo is not aware of all the powers of the ring to begin with. And it only gradually becomes apparent. And the more he learns, the worse it gets. But it's always, Tolkien always knew how the system worked, but the characters did not necessarily know how the system worked. So.
The book you were talking about earlier, that would have been Crosstalk, wouldn't it?
Crosstalk about telepathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent book, by the way.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Ian.
So the way I'm very mercenary when I'm plotting a book and kind of going through the outline. And so I tend to work from a premise and then work backwards and ask myself, or a setting. And then I work backwards and ask myself, okay, who would have the most interesting problem? What kind of character would have an interesting problem? Also, combined with the ability to take actions that have consequences. Somebody who has no ability to affect the story can have big problems, but that's not interesting. So in a world of magic, where that comes into my process is, every single character has something they want and something they need. They have several things they want and several things they need, several things they don't want. The important thing is that magic just doesn't give them the ability to get whatever they want. In fact, I like to turn that around, and I try to make the magic something that gets in their way, because the stories aren't really about the magic anyway. And I think it's just very important that the limitations to the magic system, as Connie said, have to be very, very well thought out, and they have to be logical. I like to think of magic as in terms of the one big lie, right? I get one big lie that if I do a good job, readers will sort of go along with me on that. But from that point on, everything has to be logical. And so those limitations, again, have to be built in a way that are logical and self-consistent, and yet don't interfere with that heart of the story, that conflict between want and need, and so on and so forth. And I like what Connie said about the gradual unraveling or the gradual revealing of how it all works. Nobody comes in, as a 50th level wizard, completely understanding everything, right?
Makes sense. And Carol.
I built a number of different ways there to limit magic. I've had one series where magic is a bloodline thing, and it's a restrictive bloodline. So in other words, when you have a family of cartographers and you have a family of diviners, and the children of that union will inherit either the mother's bloodline magic or the father's bloodline magic. And in this, because not everybody in the world has magic at all, then magic becomes a commodity to be sold and contracted out, that children of these families are contracted out, whether to a noble, if you're a cartographer and the king needs his cartographer to make maps for him or to track his enemies, that talent can express itself in a number of different ways. But what happens in this, the consequence here is that these families are very restrictive of who their children can marry. And in fact, they have to choose sometimes they'll have a leaning to each one, but they have to choose one or the other because that makes it more valuable. And if these families stay apart, the whole structure of society has become where you have these families who enrich themselves by contracting out their members to people for a lot of money because it's so valuable. But then you have people who rebel, which, so you think who's going to be affected by the consequence? Well, you have a young man who's, he has a bent toward one, but he can't bear the restriction of it. And the fact that he says it's slavery with golden chains. You live in luxury, but you have to do these things. It's very strict rules. And then, then you have, then I have another system where, magic is, it's believed to come through the blood, but it's become clear it's degenerate. It doesn't seem to work anymore. Or you have magic comes through the blood, and there's a young man who has that family mark, and yet he tries and tries, and he can't do it. He yearns for it, and he can't do it. So you look for the people, the outliers, the people who, where this systemic thing. In my system, I don't invent the whole thing in the beginning. Like with the contractual magic, I invented the thought of these different families who had these different things and the restrictions, but I didn't explore them fully until I got to writing the book and finding out, okay, what about this? And I develop as I go along, and then I go back and I read it through because I am an organic story developer and I don't write outlines. But that my magic sort of evolves in that way as well. I set down certain guidelines at the beginning of what I believe it's going to be, and then it all, it gets becomes more organic. But I think you then look for the consequences of things, and you find out, in this kind of a society, or in the society where it's so forbidden, you end up with a lot of loneliness, because if you can't share it, or if you're not allowed to share it, in some places I have, it's illegal because of this mythological history, like in the Chimera books, but you end up with a lot of loneliness, and the people have to deal with that, or they have to deal with this disorder of you use it too much, and you start going crazy, or you find yourself, the moral change that I think you mentioned before, or Connie did, about that it's the moral compromise that you have to make and how it changes yourself. And I think that builds up these kinds of limiting factors that, or if you use it too much, you go mad. That's what it says. And so you have this constant fear. And so I think your limitations can evolve, however you structure your society and your world, and structure the magic itself, as it evolves. There come up these sort of natural limitations. Well, it would be more interesting if not everybody, I don't think I've ever worked with a system myself where the power itself is unlimited. I do have where the power is in nature, and it's the magical talent is the ability to control these forces of nature. It's how you access them. There are people, the old fuddy-duddies, who use formulas, and they say you have this much stone, this weight of stone, and this weight of air, of these 5 divine elements, and which are like stone and water and Cate or whatever. And you have formulas and you have books of formulas, and that doesn't seem to work. And then you have somebody else who's learned to do it sort of on the fringes, where it's actually this area of the world, and it's thinking about these things. So it's your magic can be in so many different forms, that it's the actual mental control and the visualization, for example, visualization of consequence of the properties of nature itself, not just individual bits of nature, but the whole properties of nature itself. And then you draw the barriers around it about who can do it and what happens if you don't. So I like, that's that's the way I use it.
How are we on time?
Oh, well, my buzzer hasn't gone.
You're about 10 minutes-ish out.
Yeah.
10 minutes out. Thank you very much.
That's lovely.
Since we're 10 minutes out, I should probably just make a comment here and say that my experience with why it's important to limit magic is along the lines of it's not just you can have a much more interesting story if you have a limit to it. I know that in my Iron Spell Chronicles, my hero isn't very good at magic at first. And so as a result, how he learns it is from wizarding magazines. So so he's meanwhile flipping through magazines trying to find a right spell in order to combat his particular problem. And sometimes he comes up with something pretty good, but a lot of it is pretty funny. So as you can imagine, especially when he starts ad-libbing on it, things get a little weird. I want to, since we've got 10 minutes, I'm going to say that we'll have any questions for our panelists over at the Discord chat rooms, the Pandora Discord chat room over on MileHiCon website. That way we can just get everything done and get through with our time as it's been allotted. I'd like any final words that you all have, because we've got 10 minutes. Might as well start wrapping it up here. Carol, you first, and then we'll go to Ian, Connie, and then Lynn, and then I'll say something, and we'll meet everybody over in the Discord chat room.
Well, I think for me, certainly, one of the other panelists, and I can't say which one, talked about, the point of the book is not the magic. The magic is a tool. To me, every story that I've written, every book that I've written could be set in modern day New York with no magic, or modern day Colorado with no magic. It could be in ancient Greece, it could be whatever, because the story is about people and situations that they're in and emotional things. To me, I love writing magic, and I love using magic like science, or using magic like religion, or prayer, whatever the story is I'm trying to write. And so that's one reason. But I do think, just like any of those things, it can shape a character, or a character can shape the magic back and forth. And to me, that's one of the joys of writing and reading fantasy as well, is that it's what does it evoke from the situation? What does it, how does it figure into the development and change of a character? does a sorcerer become morally compromised? Or if not, why not? Or, yeah, Keza, do something else. Oops. Shh, shh. 5 more minutes. Okay, so I'll be quiet and let everybody else. That's my take.
Ian,
Earlier in the panel, Connie said when we were talking about whether there's always a price for magic or whether it's endless power, I think it was Connie said that undoubtedly somebody somewhere has come up with an exception. And I certainly can't think of one off the top of my head, but I jotted that down and I've been racking my brain to try to think of something. And this probably doesn't count because this is totally not the point of the story anyway. But I started thinking about Prospero in The Tempest. Does he, and my memory for story is not very good, even when I have seen it performed within the last couple of years. Does Prospero pay a price for his magic? Because he gets everything he wants in the end, right?
He loses his daughter. I mean, it's in a good way.
Yeah.
She gets married, goes off,
Yeah.
he loses her. And
But he's happy about it though, isn't he? I mean, it's,
oh yeah, but he also realizes that to atone for everything, he needs to drown his books and stop being a magician.
Humble.
Oh
sure.
yeah.
So yeah, I think there is a price. It's just not a real negative price, but
Yeah,
there's a
you're right
price, I
though.
think.
There is something. There is something.
There's something. It's not just okay. So he's going to go on casting
Right.
spells.
Right.
Not
Okay.
on
Good point. Good job, Shakespeare.
Good job. Shakespeare's always the best.
We'll let him into the party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Connie, you're next.
Well, I was thinking of the fairy tales, which are really interesting because fairy tales are very slimmed down stories. They don't spend very much time on background or setting or character development or anything. But it's amazing how in the magic they do take time usually to establish the logic of the magic. So it isn't just that the mean fairy comes and puts a curse on Sleeping Beauty. She puts a curse on Sleeping Beauty because she was not invited to the christening. And Beauty in Beauty and the Beast ends up having to be a prisoner of the Beast because the dad, he stole a rose from the garden. Now, these are not necessarily bad crimes. I wouldn't invite the fairy either to the christening. And he didn't know who lived there, and he didn't realize there was anybody who'd care that he took a flower. But, in each of the cases, and in Rapunzel, it's stealing the rampion from the witch's garden, that these people that sets these curses, magical spells in power in the first place. So they delve into that. And sometimes it may seem like the fairy tales are arbitrary, like, why does Cinderella have to come home at midnight? And although it makes the story, it absolutely makes the story, but why, what's the logic? And I loved it when they did the movie, The Slipper and the Rose, which is a musical version of Cinderella, a wonderful movie. And the fairy godmother happens to be passing, and here's Cinderella wishing she could go to the ball, and she's late and she's overworked and she's used up almost all of her magic for her allotment for the day. And she says, oh, I really don't have time and I really don't have enough magic. But if I stretched it a little and I was careful not to go, I think I can make it just do. And then, of course, that's why she has to put the restriction of midnight on it. So the fairy tales really work hard on their logic, even though they do it in a space of a couple of lines. They don't elaborate a lot, but almost always there is a logic to the magic and a logic to the price. Sometimes it's up front. You can only have 3 wishes, or if you ask for the wrong thing, like the fisherman and his wife, you'll blow it and end up with nothing. They're different, but there's almost always a logic there. And I think fairy tales are very well constructed stories. So we probably should look to them more often for how to set up our magical systems.
Thank you, Connie. Lynn.
Okay, well, I was thinking, in addition to the things that everyone else has mentioned, one of the things that I always notice when I'm reading fantasy stories or science fiction stories is how whatever it is that is the magical element impacts the world. I mean, the printing press impacted our world and changed our world. The internal combustion engine changed our world. Technology has changed our world. If you're going and writing a fantasy story, how does the having magic impact the world? It's, you know, if people don't have to, you know, struggle to grow crops because they can just blink an eye and there's food on the table, that's going to be a very different world than one where people are out there sweating in the and toiling in the fields. So I think when we're looking at the magic and the kinds of magic and the cost of magic, we also need to look at the impact of the magic in the life of the characters in the story, but also in the world that we're setting this story in, so that it actually fits.
Right.
I guess that would be my. I tend to look at things from a frustrated cultural anthropologist type of point of view. I want the world to work, and so when I'm doing when I write a character, I wanted characters in a science fiction setting who were telepathic. Why would they be telepathic? How would they have evolved telepathy? Well, they evolved telepathy because it made them more successful on the hunt. And, you know, and then it kind of, okay, now come forward many, many millions of years, and now they're spacefaring telepathic aliens, you know, but I had to come up with a why did this happen and how did it impact their society? So, you know, I look at the bigger world from the macro view, as well as then the microcosm of, okay, now these characters in that world, here's how they go forward and how whatever story element is going to happen to them.
Awesome. Awesome. So I think we're pretty much out of time or close to. If you would like to talk, if anyone listening would like to talk to our panelists, go over to the MileHiCon's Discord room. They have a Pandora room, and you can chat with us over there. And I want to thank you all for being such lovely participants. And I will see some of you in my next panel. You have a great day.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
you.
Bye all.
Very fun. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.